protests in the capital city of Kiev demand the removal of alleged corrupt president Viktor Yanukovych. After a sacked European Union deal, the mostly peaceful protest quickly turned violent within weeks. And by the middle of 2014, Ukraine had a new president. High-level corruption existing previous to the 2014 changes.
Who comes with a sword will fall from the sword.
Torture, kidnappings, and murder, tainting the regime of new president Petro Poroshenko.
It's kind of slightly bizarre, I have to say. I've been watching these pictures for the last 45 minutes or so, and the protesters are sort of just wandering through. They look like they're on a kind of tourist visit or something, wandering through. I can't see any sign of security there. Then normally you would expect security to be there.
Years before the Capitol riots in January of 21, individuals from various Ukrainian groups were organized. Along with ordinary citizens, the people surrounded the Capitol building in Kiev, determined not to exit until results were acquired. What happened next speaks for itself.
Beating back protesters, those protesters, though, they say they will stay in Kiev Square until they get what they want. Tens of thousands of people filling the streets over the last 3 days. Now, they're furious at the government's last-minute decision to suspend talks on a political and economic deal with the European Union.
Yesterday, anti-government protesters toppled a statue of former Soviet leader Vladimir Lenin. They're angry with the decision by President Viktor Yanukovych to break away from the European Union.
Now in Kiev, filled with tents as its protesters don't want to back down. But you did have the current prime minister coming out and says he sees all the signs of a coup.
Demonstrators fill the streets of the capital. They want the president to quit because he wants to tilt the nation toward Russia instead of the West.
In 2 hours or so, a meeting with the opposition and the president. Should he be making more concessions now?
Any violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity would be deeply destabilizing, which is not in the interest of Ukraine, Russia, or Europe.
But yesterday, the demonstrators woke up to discover that they were suddenly in control of Ukraine's capital. The riot police had simply melted away, and the Interior Ministry, which controls the police, said it was now on the side of the protesters.
Is there any word on where President Viktor Yanukovych is and who is at the presidential palace? Are the opposition supporters there at the palace?
But then the demonstrators discovered there was no one left to fight.
Parliament reformed itself, took power back from President Viktor Yanukovych, and then proceeded to vote him out of office. The police, meanwhile, seem to have vacated downtown Kiev. Government buildings are now being guarded by protesters, volunteers who have taken up checkpoints outside of the presidential palace and even outside Yanukovych's vast residence.
The presidential palace, which is just outside of Kiev, has also been abandoned, with protesters wandering through the president's private apartment.
President Yanukovych was out, whether he wanted to admit it or not.
They took over the grounds of the luxurious presidential palace, which had been abandoned. The protesters are in control of the centre of Kiev. We haven't seen police anywhere today. Yanukovych refuses to go. He appeared on television yesterday saying there had been a coup. He said he was still president, and he compared the protesters to Nazis.
And now Russian President Vladimir Putin says the ones responsible for Ukraine's revolution is mostly neo-Nazi protesters, bringing back cringing memories from World War II.
I went out on the internet and Googled Ukraine neo-Nazi, and there's many articles about the neo-Nazis that have taken over their government, and it looks just horrible. And I can't understand why the media isn't reporting this, and why the Congress people aren't really explaining this.
Well, sir, first of all, please understand that there is a great deal of Russian propaganda that is paid for. The Russian government.
We'll get to the Congresswoman later, as we get the comments of the late Zbigniew Brzezinski, a staple of the Karcha regime, and his thoughts on the Nazi Ukraine, and according to him, the Nazi Russia.
There are probably some Nazis, or neo-Nazis, more accurately, in Ukraine. They're a very minor group, very similar in that respect to some neo-Nazis in Russia, who seem to be a little more visible, actually, and who even have a very prominent philosopher supporting them and instructing on that basis Mr. Putin as to what his vision of the world ought to be. I think you know what I'm referring to.
The IMF has already stepped in with a multi-billion-dollar aid package for Ukraine.
We call on Russia to stop supporting men hiding behind masks in unmarked uniforms, sowing unrest in eastern Ukraine. And we have been clear that more provocative behavior by Russia will lead to more costs.
We need to make it clear to the Russian government and Vladimir Putin that interference in the affairs of Ukraine is not acceptable to the United States of America or to any other free country in the world.
Critics argue the presence of the vice president's son on the board of a prominent gas company, the continual procession of US officials in and out of Kiev, and the promise of financial and military aid represents its own form of interference.
Several months after the coup, Western leaders began to get quite comfortable in the capital city of Kiev. The Vice Biden wasted little time setting up an executive position for his son, Hunter. The shady dealings of Hunter Biden led to unfortunate results for the family, because only months into the dream job of the younger Biden, the entire Biden family would suffer worldwide humiliation after Hunter is booted out of the U.S. military after being busted for the smoking of crack cocaine.
You're going to bring in another $1 billion in construction, another $1 billion in port infrastructure projects along the Delaware River.
The $300 million dredging project should be finished by 2017.
Meantime, a son of Vice President Joe Biden is no longer serving in the military. NBC News has learned that Hunter Biden was booted earlier this year after failing a drug test.
His older brother, Beau, is a major in the Delaware Army National Guard.
I'm looking forward to standing with our son Hunter when he is commissioned as an ensign in the United States Navy. He follows in the footsteps of two of his grandfathers, who have also served in the Navy.
The United States is prepared to work with any nation, including Russia and Iran, to resolve the conflict.
Nearing the end of 15, President Obama, in lame duck status at this point in October of that year, a president used to the vast majority of mainstream media to go easy on him, is surprised during a 60 Minutes interview.
When I came into office, Ukraine was governed by a corrupt ruler who was a stooge of Mr. Putin. Syria was Russia's only ally in the region.
But whose puppet is the current Ukraine president? And the one before that? Perhaps the government of Ukraine used to be puppets while backed by Russia, but now, while backed by the United States and the West, are not. It was at this time that the Kremlin had brokered a deal that would remove Syrian chemical weapons surrendered by the government of Bashar al-Assad, and further tension would not escalate over this issue.
And Russia is not going to roll across the inner line here and take over the rest of the country with their tanks. What they're going to do is they're going to take your economy down. You're going to be absolutely buried, and you're going to be done. And that's when it all goes to hell.
The disastrous Petro Poroshenko regime that lasted from 14 until 19, the people of Ukraine elected the young Volodymyr Zelensky.
Я, Володимир Зеленський, волею народу обраний президентом України, заступаючи на цей високий пост, урочисто присягаю на вірність Україні.
Joe Biden, U.S. Vice President number 47, becomes U.S. President number 46.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
Office of President of the United States. So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
President Biden was able to tell President Zelensky that he will stand up firmly for Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and its aspirations as we go forward. And he also told President Zelensky that he looks forward to welcoming him to the White House here in Washington this summer.
I still remember the opportunity I had to speak to the Rada years ago, and I look forward to being able to come back someday to see you.
Right after the meetings of the new presidents of the Ukraine and United States, troubling allegations arise between NATO and the Kremlin. These issues began to grow quite serious in October of 21 and continued to fester until invasion was inevitable, though it was hardly the only factor. NATO's allegations of Russian spies and its blowback.
NATO has withdrawn the accreditation of 8 members of the Russian mission to NATO. NATO, of course, headquartered here in Brussels. They say they were undeclared Russian intelligence officers.
Expulsion of Russian diplomats from its mission at NATO headquarters in Brussels 2 weeks ago. The Western Alliance says they were spies. Moscow has dismissed those accusations as baseless.
The main problem in this conflict that Russia doesn't respect the integrity of a sovereign independent nation. So we have decided and stated in NATO that Ukraine will become a member of NATO, but Ukraine will become a member of NATO when 30 allies agree that Ukraine meet the NATO standards. And that's for the 30 allies to decide, not for Russia to decide.
Russian President Putin departs the year of 2021.
Вы наверняка знаете хорошо. Ни одного дюйма на восток, сказали нам в 90-е годы. Ну и чего? Надули. Просто нагло обманули. 5 волн расширения НАТО.
А що нам треба конкретно зробити?
What exactly do we have to do to live free lives, free and prosperous lives? All this is enshrined in the agreement on political association and free trade zone with the European Union.
A war in Ukraine. Money, NATO, respect.